Thank you so much, Sonia. And yeah, thank you to everyone for logging in. Yeah, I found the previous conversation very interesting. So yes, just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Vanessa Murrell. I'm a writer, curator, and educator from Spain, and I'm based in London. So I'm quite dedicated to the inclusion of emerging artists and underrepresented sectors. Within that practice, I co-founded the contemporary art platform DATEAGLE ART in 2017. So since its inception, I've interviewed over 200 artists and expanded my activities to include exhibitions, commissions, and educational initiatives. The premise is to do one studio visit per week, although that is quite challenging lately. But yeah, the whole premise of DATEAGLE ART is really nurturing conversations and behind the scenes and getting to meet artists. And that's why I'm really excited to be involved in the lunchtime speed show, which we are now. We're going to have short presentations, as Tonya said, from 4 Synesthesia I and II writers and artists. Each of the 4 speakers will be presenting roughly 6 minutes each. And of course, after that, there's time for questions and answers. I do welcome you all to put any questions in the chat as we're discussing, so we can go back to them later on. And just to briefly introduce Synesthesia, for those of you who might not be aware, it's an experimental project that facilitates collaborations between curators, writers, and artists. It's part of the Cultivator Showcase led by the Bridge at the University of Plymouth, and also in partnership with Creative Kerno. So this is the 2nd edition of Synesthesia, and they partnered with me and my partner Martin from DATEAGLE ART for the first time. So as a platform, 5 of our London-based writers had conversations and wrote texts in relation to the work and process of 10 artists from across Cornwall and the islands of Sicily, and they are all published in our platform, which is dateagle.art. I can add the link in the chat as well if you're interested, and they're also published in the synesthesia.online website. What was very interesting about this is how it managed to merge the London-centric voices with the rural community, because that exchange is often not possible. So anyways, before I continue, I thought it would be nice to introduce the first speaker, which is Melanie Stidolph. She's an artist and photographer, curator of public program at Tate St. Ives. Her recent projects revolve around her experience of childlessness, and she's currently working on her first photo book and titled Endless Reproduction. So she's going to share excerpts from her writing within this. I'm going to lead to Melanie. You're welcome to chat.
Thanks very much, Vanessa, and thanks, Tonya, for inclusion in the programme. And actually, it's really nice to kind of present this being further along as a project, because where you mentioned Sauvé and Sarah's project that you work with, that was the first time that I kind of talked about it publicly. So it's really nice to feel that it's got further along, and I'm sharing it now. So I'll do the share screen. Great. So I'm working on this book, Endless Reproduction, which is photographs that were taken over a period between 2010 and 2015. A few were exhibited, and then I revisited all of them in 2020 and saw the parallels between my story at the time and my practice. So the photographs were made during the year I was unsuccessfully trying to get pregnant. And when I looked back into the hundreds of images, I realized there was an unexpected layer of synchronicity with the photographs I was making and my lived experience. So the images echo a hopeful beginning to a journey. They take in medical interventions and track a belief that eventually fades. We start in nature, shift through domestic interiors, and come to rest in a no man's land of studio and darkroom interiors. The writing has developed alongside the edit for the book. I wanted to strike a balance between letting the images breathe, but not wanting the story to be hidden, because telling it and talking about it was a big part of the difficulty of experiencing it. And through experiences shared by other women who are childless not by choice, I know that understanding the context of your grief helps in navigating through it. And the next slide, please, Tonya. This is me then, approximately a decade ago, caught by the camera as I'm testing the kit. And I think I included it not because it's in the book. There are no images of me in the book, or just limbs occasionally. But I think because as I was writing, and then I sent it to an editor friend to have a look at, I realized that I continually switched tenses as to where I was. So kind of situating myself in the present and then speaking kind of in the moment when it was a decade ago. So yeah, I think I've just popped it in for that. Next one, please, Tonya. So I'm going to read extracts from each of the chapters. This is from chapter 1, Nature, 2011. Wales. At this point, we're still trying naturally, hopefully, but already it's been a couple of years and nothing. We started late, perhaps at age 40, after a decade of negotiation. We're in Wales, staying in a friend's caravan, a week away with our new puppy and my bag full of camera equipment. Trigger Smart fires the camera shutter when something breaks the infrared beam. It's Di Jenkins's caravan. His partner, Emma Hart, is working on a show for Matt's gallery in London called To Do, where birds and cameras become merged as sculptures. The caravan has bird identification books, binoculars, and a perch outside the window of the double bedroom where the birds land for seed. Next one, thanks. Chapter 2, Timing, 2011. In Essex now, at my stepfather Doug's house. He's made me a camera trigger kit and adapted a Tupperware box to keep it in when I travel. I am touched by the gesture and can almost forgive him for an offhand comment he made when my brother announced that he and his wife are pregnant again. There's you can't even program the DVD player. I remember the announcement for that and for my brother's joke. We think we know what's causing it now, which still makes me smile. Next one. Chapter 3, Repetition, 2012. London, home, mine and S's flat together for 15 years. The places I'm taking photographs in have changed, and the significance of this escaped me until Emma said, "Oh, you've come inside." Again and again, balls are thrown and dropped. The press of the shutter is a link to accident and automation with the Trigger Smart kit. I'm looking for something that connects with this desperate feeling inside. I tried to document us, but I look at those pictures now and they are sad. We are no longer together. In my wedding speech, 7 years later, to M, the man who stood beside me in a queue in the supermarket and then for life, I said how I felt at the time, that my heart would literally break. Next one. I set Trigger Smart to fire the shutter when sound levels in the darkroom change, activated by the noise of the enlarger light coming on and off and the sound of the camera flash itself. Lincoln in the darkroom, enlarger head, dog head, DeVere 504, safe light. The lights of the timer glowing red in a row. A photograph in 2 halves. A black layer across the bottom obscures the dog's body. Nothing practical or precise is happening here. This image taken from a different camera, out of sync with the one that fired the flash. Next one. 5, random, 2015. Arts University Bournemouth, the photo studio. I'm senior lecturer in photography. I hold workshops using the Trigger Smart kit. We throw fake flowers and fruit and burst balloons. I don't talk about trying to get pregnant and the attachment I have with the kit and its processes. Here it's just a gadget with some props. The students make beautiful images, like Harold Edgerton test shoots. No bullets, but a pocket knife to burst a balloon with a hand gripping tightly. I feel that tension. These aren't my images, but I've borrowed them to sit with the others. I love this moment of making together. There's a stillness, a strange sense of composition, despite the free fall, but also implied explosions and collisions just before and after the photographs. I like sharing the kit with the students and the openness of their images. Last one. This photo is by John Hersey, who's done all the beautiful portraits for everybody in Synesthesia I and II. It's taken at Trajan, in a place that I often photograph and have made a short film at. I think I love this image. I think it's really beautiful. So I put it here as a kind of present, having shown an image from like a decade ago to start with. And to mention that if anybody is kind of moved to find out more about the book, I have a Kickstarter on the go. We're at 94% completed. So if anybody can topple me over the edge in terms of support, I would love that. But thanks very much for listening. Thanks, Tonya.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It was truly amazing. And I'm very curious to know whether you developed the images first or the writing, or what came before what. But I'm guessing we can talk about that all later on. So I'm going to pass on to, Lizzie, Lizzie Lloyd, who is a senior lecturer in fine arts, art and writing at the University of West of England, who explores arts writing that holds theory, practice, experimentation, and subjectivity in the balance. She's going to present on the value of in-progress conversations between artists and writers, and why we should all be doing this more often. So Lizzie, I really look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hi, Vanessa, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. My talk actually follows on really well from Melanie's, and I'll explain why. I'm going to start by reading an excerpt from a text that I wrote called A Body in Parts Interjects, which I wrote in response to Melanie Stidolph's work as part of Synesthesia in 2020, which seems kind of fitting for today. Actions proliferate. Inside, looking out, a bird alights, an apple falls, the bird is missing, a camera awaits. Inside, looking in, a light flares, balls are thrown, a chair drops, an egg breaks, a shadow is cast. A balloon is punctured, a white orb glows, the same chair drops, another egg is thrown, light reflects. A light flashes, a shutter releases. Periodically, a body in parts interjects, standing, reaching, holding, yielding. More bodies outside this time, swimming, looking, sitting, paddling, drying, lying, clambering, searching. They laugh, chatter, call out. The camera waits, the camera waits, the camera waits. This chronicling of Stidolph's work tells but part of the story. In my retelling, I'm surely mixing things, my chronology awry. Past moments bleed into present, future, and imagined moments, their particularity dissolving through the action of repetition, reframing, and looking again. My retelling here is another repetition, of course, another way to make sense of the images, another attempt at reconfiguring them according to another kind of logic, in relation to another kind of life. I often talk about the act of writing, about art as being inherently active. If it wanted to, it could never offer a pure, direct, objective presentation of the artwork at hand. It is never past. Who wants purity anyway? Give me gloriously messy, beautifully dirty, awkwardly hybrid any day. The joyous difficulty that attracts me to writing about art is the attempt, and we've talked about this a lot this morning, to capture that which is lost in the translation from you to me, from there to here, from the screen to the page, from the visual and the sensory to the verbal. That which I can't quite grasp. It is this difficulty that generates, that drives a text. I imagine its content and form making itself known as it goes along, a push and pull as each depression of the keyboard attempts to know the work, to feel the work a little better. I'm fascinated by this view of writing as present, as in progress, as emergent, as improvised, as unknown, as feeling its way through. It is feeling its way through the spatial dynamics of the intersubjective relationships between artwork, artist, audience, writer, and so on. These relationships are made and remade in the retellings. The passage I read at the beginning, the sort of list of actions, is an attempt to fall into step with Melanie's work, to write its rhythms, to retain its spirit as a way of seeking out a verbal, if imperfect, equivalence. In every retelling, I wonder how the words that I write can belong to or reflect both me and the artwork which has elicited them, and the artist from whom the artwork evolved in the first place. How can we share them? How can they hold us all with all our complicated needs, hopes, fears, desires, intentions, convictions, hunches, and doubts? How do these elements manifest, emerging from the site of our shared encounter? Sometimes, of course, it emerges through a literal conversation, as in Synesthesia, which this project which is founded on the model of the conversation between writers and artists to discuss work in progress. I can't wholly speak for the value of the artist, of this kind of model for the artist in this equation, but for me, the starting place of the conversation, the in-depth, wholehearted, all-in conversation with an artist is a total joy. I've been in this job long enough to know that artists don't always enjoy talking about their work, of course. I recently heard a talk with Neva O'Malley, who I wrote about recently, and she describes that in the lead up to her exhibition at the Venice Biennale, she describes a kind of frustration with the expectation for her to describe things in words. She finds it, she says, deeply problematic. But the process of trying to verbalize, and again, we've talked about difficulty a lot this morning, trying to verbalize, trying to translate with difficulty from one language to another can, she admits, be generative. This is what I love about a low pressure conversation with a sympathetic and supportive audience. In articulating their practice, artists can start to work out what they might think about something. They start to notice patterns in their decision making, start to understand why they might have made some decisions and not others, and perhaps approach the next project with those new thoughts in mind. The writer absorbs this, holds all this, and then offers something else too. The two enter, meet, attract, repel, digress, challenge, and sometimes, though not necessarily, merge, echo, and maybe cross-fertilize. I have in mind the image of a gathering, a murmuration of images and words, a swooping, billowing, pirouetting, enfolding. Such connections generate particular types of behavior, mirroring, analogous maneuvering, splitting off. As you picture these hypothetical relations, you begin to realize not just that you cannot keep up because they are constantly morphing, changing direction, adjusting, but also that the individual elements that you set to observe seem to respond to your presence there. The words that you have thrown skywards in an attempt to capture, trace, describe in movement now dance too. You watch as those words, your words, disperse, silhouetted against a paper white sky. The space between them dilates and contracts, by turns appearing to follow and lead. Hardly distinguishable, they become absorbed into the swarm. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. That was really very poetic. And yeah, I'm pretty sure lots of audience members will have a lot of questions. I'm just going to introduce you briefly, Delpha, and then pass the mic to you. So Delpha Hudson is an artist who makes work about women's lives and the nature of self. So she's going to present a wordless performance about language and the visual. Man created the word, woman created the world. So that's all yours, Delpha.
Hi, that's a really nice surprise. I am all ready to go. That was just the moment that my husband came home from work. So yes, thank you very much. I would like to introduce myself as an artist who is predominantly painting now, but has long had a practice in other media, including performance, film, curation, and the other things. So in thinking about the relationship between words and visual images, I was drawn back to a performance I made for a live art programme in Oxford in 2001, which was my very first, which was the only time I kind of re-performed a performance score that I made as my first interaction with other students in 1999. So this is a visual performance about language, yet without spoken word. It asks questions about how we exceed and escape from the limitations of language, like much of my other earlier work. And it was very interesting earlier hearing JR talk about these temporal gaps between work. and it's something that I use sometimes, even when I'm painting and I'm thinking about previous performance practice. So I thought of this piece as a tableau vivant, which is translated as a living picture. It also felt for me a very personal piece of work, which was about the ritualized shedding of persona, contemplating the multiplicity of self and the roles that women inhabit physically in and beyond patriarchal language and power structures that constrain women's lives. So as I say, I've never before been tempted to re-perform this in any way, and certainly not to webcam, because I think liveness and real-time presence are paramount to performance. Yet it feels today like a resonant way to explore relationships between visual representation and language. So this is very much a very pared down version in the few minutes I have left. So I want you to know that you're missing out me gutting mackerel, wearing fishing gear, oilskins, wearing layers of clothing, including wedding dress, suits, and typing on a typewriter, which today is aptly positioned in the sink. So whatever minutes I've got left, this is part of the performance. Thank you.
That was really amazing, Delpha, and I cannot wait to ask you more about it later on in the Q&A. I'm going to pass on to Bridgette Ashton, who is a multidisciplinary artist working in sculpture, ceramics, and works on paper. In an effort to make sense of information, she will present ideas about identifying connections and commonalities.
Hi, I am going to share my screen. I've actually got the remnants of COVID at the moment, so I've pre-recorded my talk because I can't speak very well. And so I'll share my screen and then we'll get going.
I want to talk about how I use diagrams and mind maps in my work.
Is that working?
Yes. The value
Excellent.
of them and how they represent a kind of unfolding of thought and processing ideas. And so I want to talk about two kind of projects that I've worked on over the years. The first one being this series of drawings which identified a network of connections between American TV stars of the 1970s and 80s. And I kind of, the core of it was the singer sort of TV star Andy Gibb, who died young. And so I started to play around with ways that I could link him with a number of other people from that era. I set specific parameters when I was developing this kind of diagram, and I had to make a lot of changes because I wanted them to be laid out in a certain format. So I played around with it, lots and lots of drawing and diagramming and writing and trying to find these connections. And the resulting piece was two versions of it. There was a giant sort of drawing with portrait heads. So I linked them together by either marriage or the TV show they were in. And so I managed to make quite a complex diagram that joined all of these people together where none of the lines actually overlapped. So I had to move them around a lot. And I always work on paper. I never do like digital versions of mind maps because I find it sort of, your thoughts unfold as you're kind of drawing and writing with a pencil to paper, or I find that. The second version of this drawing was an installation in a gallery in South London where the images were screen printed, and I joined them together with thread with words on them. It was a slightly different arrangement, but the links were still the same. As a byproduct of these diagrams, I formulated another version of relationships where I picked out 12 of the people who were in the original diagram and placed them next to their spouse, and then also documented previous and subsequent spouses. And so the initial idea and mapping out of this idea kind of yielded sort of multiple outcomes. So this is a kind of introduction to another body of work that I made about underground sites that cannot be visited, either because they no longer exist or they're too dangerous or delicate to visit. This was a useful way of sort of breaking down ideas behind works that I've made over probably 5 years. And I started to make diagrams that were based on existing sort of educational or teaching diagrams that I stole from the internet and then slightly played around with quite badly in Photoshop. This diagram here presents facts about Lascaux Caves and the many reconstructions that now exist as visitor attractions. And by presenting the diagram in this sort of form, I'm trying to imply some sort of objectivity and suggest that it is an actual printed diagram that maybe is in the back of a textbook. And so that finished diagram sort of came about by developing ideas using Venn diagrams, where the format or the process, it forces you to kind of analyze the difference between certain terminologies and also the similarities between terminologies, and to think about what each of these elements bring to one another. This I then kind of developed into another sort of fake publication that implies that it's going to give you all the answers, but because it doesn't really exist. So I just wanted to close with images of some of the works that those diagrams were actually informed by, and the diagrams themselves were produced as a way to try to communicate ideas behind these works. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Bridgette. I guess my first initial idea when seeing your presentation was about the mind maps, how coincidental that you are currently undergoing COVID and how that has shown really the relationships between people. I remember when it started in China and people were like, it's never going to come here, and then it just shows how we are all truly so connected.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if anyone wanted to ask any questions from the audience, because we have a bit of room for questions. If anyone wanted to jump in, write it in the chat. I'm happy to ask about that. Maybe to kind of follow the order as everyone has presented. I was wondering, Delpha, what I really enjoyed about your presentation, like your performance, was how you could feel the sound within the screen. And I'm wondering if you can tell us more about the shape that you made live.
Oh, yes. Well, so the lard baby, actually, I realise has featured in a few things, and lard has been a fantastic performance art project, performance material, as used. I'm going to forget his name now, just having a moment, by many fantastic artists. Sorry, I prepped that name to make sure I wouldn't forget. Anyway, so lard is a really nasty, messy material, and I quite like sort of using with that and using it for a metaphor. And the lard babies kind of relate to women's potential reproductive power, and that relationship with language and hierarchies and power structures that often can contain women. So this particular performance, I felt, because I'm very interested in mythic versioning at the moment, and I'm doing a lot of ekphrastic writing about my paintings. So I'm interested in my archive, which I have an archive site online with a lot of previous work, and the reimagining, as we do with so much work that might be documented, although it was interesting to hear one of the presenters talk about not documenting work, which is also a very interesting thing to do with live acts. But the relationships with the past and over time.
Amazing, thank you, Delpha. That's very interesting. And maybe I was also quite curious, well, with the relationships between Melanie's presentation and also Lizzie's, which, you know, also goes to show with the last presentation about the diagrams, how everything is truly connected. And I was, you know, quite curious about how Melanie, in the book, you presented the images and the writing, and when you were mentioning specific things about the, you know, reading specific things, you could visually see those things in the images. And it's very related to the synesthesia as well, particularly this edition where we've asked each artist to document their studios through analog photography in the process that they were speaking with the writers. So I'm just quite curious to know whether how which one came first. Was it the images? Was it the writing? Was it one reaction to the next?
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, the writing definitely came afterwards, and it came as the edit was taking shape. And I think it came from feedback specifically that was like, don't, like, let us in, give us a clue. And I think, you know, in talking with Lizzie, like she referred to our conversation, like you start off, you know, from your own perspectives, and her title, you know, she's this kind of as it is seen, you know, so that cropped up in her writing on the work. And it, you know, her and I, different perspectives, looking in at something, looking in at the work that we've made. And I think obviously I made this work kind of a little bit, like not really knowing quite why I was making it. I was definitely making something as part of my practice, but I didn't realize that I was kind of so mirroring like the life experience that I was happening. And although I'd exhibited some of the work before, I really wanted to kind of show that then as a complete piece, so hence the book. But I think the writing really came because I didn't want it to be too obscure for people, and though I would have loved the set of images to kind of resonate in exactly the way they resonate for me, that's kind of a big ask, because we don't come with the same set of experiences. And I suppose the other thing I just want to say in relation to that is that I've realised how different it is, of course, if I'm here reading it for everyone. And when I was writing the text, I obviously wanted to write something of what I was going through, and not be shy about grief, and not be shy about kind of the experience. But I think it's very different to have that person whose experience it is saying it, and maybe at times my voice catches, maybe unintentionally, or maybe just through speech patterns, or maybe because of emotion. So I was just thinking how different that is, whereas in a way I wanted the writing to sit quite calmly alongside the images, and not kind of dominate in terms of the emotion. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Can I come in here, Vanessa?
Of course.
Mel, I thought the writing, it was amazing for me to hear Mel's talk just then, because I hadn't seen it or read any of the writing, and I thought it worked really well. I mean, it was super moving, and you know, partly having had conversations with you as well. But I thought you kind of got that, you know, you're talking about negotiating that line between that kind of very strong emotional thing and a slightly more set back, reserved, maybe not objective, but kind of just slightly separated from the situation. And I thought you did it really well. I thought it was kind of spot on. It was a kind of neutrality almost to it. And it's such a difficult thing with the work that you do and the material that you're managing there, that to kind of get that line. It's great.
That's high praise from you, Lizzie. Thank you.
I think it was quite nice that you included an image that you didn't take as well as an image that you took, because truly the artwork is not singular, right? There's so many parties involved, and it's quite nice to see how it didn't feel misplaced, that image.
Yeah, none of the images are taken by me. They're all scenarios that I've set up. So falling apples take their pictures, falling balls take their pictures. The bird landing next to the camera breaks the infrared beam and it takes its own pictures. So they're all, you know, they're all kind of like that. And that kind of distance and separation was definitely something that came into my practice at this time from the work that I previously was making. So yeah, those things are definitely there.
And Lizzie, from your text, I really enjoyed like the repetition, which I guess it was also a you know, central theme, and how you repeated specific words. And I'm wondering if when you repeated those, you wanted to enhance them more.
Funny, isn't it, with repetition? Because at once you enhance or you emphasize, but the more you do it, I'm thinking about someone like Gertrude Stein, where, you know, she uses repetition to the point where it's almost silencing the words. They no longer mean what they're meant to mean, or what they once meant, and they become a kind of, it's been described as a kind of wallpaper. Obviously, I'm not going to the kind of extremes that Stein is, but I mean, in terms of repetition, I mean, I'm interested in that generally in terms of writing about art, because I see the process of writing about art as, you know, I use that word retelling, so it's a kind of repetition in itself. And also, you know, the whole talk I started with Mel's work, and that was all about repetition and reproduction and rhythms and you know, that trying, that you keep on trying this thing. And I feel like there's loads of connections there, not just in terms of the material that Mel's working on, but also just in terms of like creative practice and writing and that trying, that essaying. So yeah, and I think it's a kind of rhythmic thing, that being attracted to repetition. I like the sound of it. I think Josie mentioned this about the kind of the feeling of the words in your mouth. So it's always quite nice to speak them. I don't usually speak my words, and so these kind of occasions it's nice to hear them out loud.
I don't know if it happens to everyone, but every time I hear myself speaking, it just repels me. It's like, oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, in terms of like any kind of recording, yeah, yes. I'll never listen to this recording. I'm sorry, Tonya. But I mean, like in my head, hearing the words and returning to some material, and that's also a weird thing, actually, returning to stuff that you've already written. Sometimes I find that a bit kind of, that freaks me out. But with Mel's, I really enjoyed going back to the text, and it felt like the right thing to do for this moment, and a kind of reflecting on this process of writing between artists and writers.
That's amazing, and I loved how both of you made us start with a bird as well.
Yeah, yeah, it was an accident, but I guess maybe that's the order I saw your images, Mel. I can't remember now.
Yeah, no, I think because when we were talking, I hadn't done the edit, and now actually that first bit that you read, it so replicates how the book is laid out now, that there is a strong narrative, but then there's lots of kind of things slightly out of order. So actually, yeah, it's kind of you foresaw it. Yeah.
And just going back to Bridgette, I mean, I know that you're not at your best, so if you're not feeling well to chat, just let us know. But I was really, I was really interested to know why you, I don't know if I caught it, but why you started with Andy Gibbs, like as a first person that you wanted to investigate more.
It was because he had sort of, because it was about relationships and marriage, etc. He had this relationship with a TV star from Dallas called Victoria Principal, and he was absolutely besotted with her, and there was stuff in the press, etc. And because he died young, it was all kind of a sort of tragic thing. And Victoria Principal was seen as this sort of woman who tempted this guy, and it was, she got lots of criticism for it when he died of, I think he died of a drug overdose. And it all of the sort of the kind of incestuousness of that time when people were working in TV in America, in like popular TV shows, it was all a kind of a facade, and their outward facing sort of presentation said nothing about what they were really like as people, and like you weren't allowed to come out at that time either. So I think in the Brady Bunch, the father in the Brady Bunch was gay but didn't come out at all. I think probably not his whole life to the public, and so it was just this kind of just sort of, Andy Gibb was a sort of antithesis, or not the antithesis, that's not the right word. He was, he summed it up basically.
And I guess in the process of doing this work, did you feel like a investigator? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a sort of specific thing that I decided to do, and I got quite obsessed with it. And the actual drawing, every pinned underneath every drawing is the person's name, their date of birth, and their date of death if they are dead. And I have stopped doing it now, but I would take the drawing out of its frame, and when sadly any of these people died, I would add a typewritten date of death. But I have stopped doing that now because it's a bit macabre.
I guess you should do one of those for the arts industry. We can see everything that's happening behind. I'm wondering, I mean, if anyone wants to jump in and ask anything as well. I know we have around 5 minutes left.
Yes, hi, I'm Harry Frick. I would like to ask a question, if that's okay, to Bridgette Ashton, please. You mentioned obsession with the media, And you also identified the notion of fake. Is there some sort of connection there in your mind?
Yes, I think it's, as I said, it's about outward-facing presentation. And I am kind of, in fact, Janice Lee, the writer who I paired with for Synesthesia, she focused on an interest of mine in fake. And so with with the caves thing as well, the whole visitor attraction being almost like hyper real, realer than the real thing, and like the fake is more is almost becomes more authentic because it's served up in a way that's palatable. And so similarly with the TV stars, it was interesting to read all of the sort of salacious stories about apparently on the Brady Bunch all the kids were doing drugs the whole time. I don't think that's really true. And like all of these actors had sort of backstories that nobody talked about. Yeah, but fake is quite fake, and sort of reconstruction is something that I'm really interested in. Excuse me.
Absolutely, because I can see the fascination with the fake, because in a way it's glossier, shinier, yes, far more interesting in some ways than the real. It's a kind of alter narrative that's going on, or a meta narrative that is going on, that in a way fires that imagination and our obsession.
Definitely, even your background is better than actually the seaside, probably.
another work of fakery there.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a brilliant answer. I love your work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry, for popping in. If anyone wanted to ask a final question before we move on to the next part of the day, they're welcome to do so. Alternatively, I know that we're moving on to at 1 p.m. there will be an hour workshop. It's titled Bollocks to the Blank Page with Ella Frears, which has quite an interesting name. And yeah, I'm guessing it's in a different Zoom link, so you're all welcome to join as well.